How are you, all of you? I hope you are fine. Have you seen the previous videos what I have uploaded in the e-learning content as well as in my YouTube channel? Very good. In today's class, we'll see about capacitors, that is, types of capacitors. What types of capacitors do you know? What types of capacitors do you know? In this presentation content, we'll see about introduction, about types of capacitors, and types of capacitors, that is, it may be fixed type, especially disc, ceramic capacitor, and electrolyte capacitors. And the other type is variable capacitor type, that is air gang, PVC gang, capacitor, trimmer capacitor. Trimmer capacitor. Capacitors generally classified as a fixed and variable type. A fixed and variable type. Capacitors normally are classified according to the type of dielectric materials. In the previous class, we have seen about types of dielectric materials used in the capacitor manufacturing process. So, according to the dielectric materials used in the capacitors, we may classify capacitors according to the dielectric materials. The most commonly type of dielectric materials, as we already mentioned in the previous class, is mica, ceramic, plastic film, or electrolyte, especially aluminum oxide and titanium oxide. These are the most dielectric materials used in the manufacturing process of capacitors. So let's see the first category, that is a fixed type of capacitors. The first fixed type of capacitors is a mica capacitor. What is mica? That means mica is used as a dielectric material. Mica is used as a dielectric material. So what is mica? What is mica? Mica is a group of material, a group of natural mineral, which is mica capacitors are capacitors which use mica as a dielectric. Mica as a dielectric. Two types, that is stacked foil and silver mica may be used. Two types, that is stacked foil and silver mica may be used in the manufacturing process. A stacked foil consists of alternate layers of a metal foil and thin sheets of mica. The metal foil forms the plate with alternate foil sheets connected together to increase the plate area. As you can see from the left side of this slide, there is a mica capacitors are there. Mica capacitors are connected in between the plates. The mica foil is inserted. These mica capacitors available from 1 picofarad up to 0.1 microfarad, and its voltage rating is in between 100 volt and 2500 volt DC. In between this, as we have seen in the previous class, the voltage rating is a very important characteristic of a capacitor. So this make mica capacitor voltage rating is in between this. The other type of a capacitor is ceramic capacitors. This is a fixed type. We are talking about fixed type of capacitor. These ceramic capacitors are a fixed type capacitors. Ceramic dielectric provides a very high dielectric constant. It is around 1200 typical. As a result, a comparatively high capacitance value can achieved in a small physical size. Due to this dielectric material higher, the capacitance can be achieved within a small size. We can achieve a higher or a larger capacitor, a larger capacitance value within a smaller size. A ceramic capacitor is a fixed value capacitor where the ceramic material acts as the dielectric. It is constructed of two or more alternating layers of ceramic and a metal layer acting as electrode. The metal layer will be inserted in the ceramic and it will act like electrode, like electrodes. Ceramic capacitors are commonly available in a ceramic disc forms, available in a capacitance value ranging from 1 picofarad to 100 microfarad with a voltage rating up to 6 kilovolt or 6000 volt. So its voltage rating is very high. If the voltage rating is very high, it is good. The capacitor is have good characteristics. The other type of fixed capacitor is a plastic film capacitor. This plastic film capacitor is commonly a common dielectric material used in a plastic film capacitors. Include it may be polycarbonate. One type of a plastic film dielectric material is it may be polycarbonate, or it may be propylene, or it may be polyester, or it may be polystyrene, or it may be polypropylene. These are a type of plastic. These are a type of plastic dielectric materials which is used in the construction or in the manufacturing process of this type of capacitors. Some of these type have a capacitance value up to 100 microfarad, but most are less than 1 microfarad. In between 1 microfarad and 100 microfarad, the manufacturers may produce this type of capacitors. We may produce this type of capacitors. The other type of a fixed type capacitor is electrolyte capacitor. What is electrolyte? What does it mean, electrolyte? In your common sense, what do you think? Electrolyte capacitors. Electrolyte capacitors are polarized. What does it mean polarized means? Have a direction. So while we are connecting or while we are replacing this type of capacitors, we should consider their connection terminals. They have poles. That means it indicates either a positive or a negative in their electrodes. So we should consider the terminals while we are connecting or replacing during a maintenance or during designing any PCB. Electrolyte capacitors are polarized so that one plate is positive and the other is negative. These capacitors are generally used for high capacitance values. It is used for high capacitance values from it may be 1 microfarad up to over 200,000 microfarad, but they have a relatively low breakdown voltage. This is their drawbacks. The voltage rating is very small, that is around 350 volt is a typical maximum, but higher voltages are occasionally found, and high amount of leakage. They have high amount of leakage due to the electrolyte movement. The ions may move from one place to another place, so there is a leakage. Do you remember the characteristics of a capacitor in the previous class? We have seen one of the characteristics of a capacitor is a leakage. It is leakage. So they have electrolyte capacitors offer much higher capacitance values than mica or ceramic capacitors, but their voltage rating are typically lower. Their voltage rating is typically lower. All electrolyte capacitors are polarized. It is polarized. The metal plate positively is usually indicated by a plus sign or some other obvious marking and must always be connected in a DC circuit. Whereas the voltage across the capacitors doesn't change polarity. Why we connect these polarized capacitors in DC? Because if we are using in AC, as you know, the alternating current will vary its polarities. So the capacitor, these electrolyte capacitors will not work in the AC. So we should use these electrolyte capacitors in DC. The metal plate positive lead is usually indicated by a plus sign or some other obvious marking and must always be connected in a DC circuit, where the voltage across the capacitor doesn't change polarity. That means we may use this type of capacitors after a rectifier circuit. The rectifier will rectify the AC into DC. A reversal of the polarity of the voltage can result in a complete destruction of the capacitor. The capacitor will damage if we reverse the polarity. The capacitor will damage. The other type of capacitor is a variable category, a variable type of capacitors. We have seen in the previous, before this topic, we have seen a fixed or a constant type of capacitors, a constant type of capacitors. Right now, we are at the position to see variable type capacitor. What does it mean variable? We have seen while we are talking about resistors, we have talked about variable resistors. What does it mean variable capacitors? Variable capacitors are used in a circuit when there is a need to adjust the capacitance value either manually or automatically. In this situation, we may select these variable capacitors. These capacitors are generally less than 300 picofarad, but are available in larger values for specialized applications. Ceramic or mica is a common dielectric in this type of capacitors, and the capacitance usually is changed by adjusting the plate separation. By the plate separation, we may vary. As you remember from the previous class, we have seen that the capacitance of a capacitor is directly proportional to its dielectric, and the area as well as inversely proportional to the separation distance. So we can, by adjusting the separation distance or either by increasing and decreasing the area, we can vary the capacitance of a capacitor of this variable type of capacitors. The first variable type of capacitor is ergang capacitor. What does it mean, ergang? The most common form arranges a group of semicircular metal. As you can see from this figure, there is a semicircular metal plates on a rotary axis, that is a rotor, and that are positioned in the gaps between the set of stationary plates, that is stator, so that the area of the overlap can be changed by rotating the axis. Air is used as a dielectric, that is why these ergang capacitors are called ergang. So by rotating the rotor, the overlap area will be either increased or decreased. The overlap area of the rotor and the stator either increased and decreased. So like this, we can manage the capacitance of a capacitor, and such type of capacitor are called ergang capacitors. When the common shaft rotated, the common area of the movable and the fixed plate changes accordingly. The greater the common area, the larger the capacitance. The capacitance of a capacitor is directly proportional to the area. Various forms of reduction gear mechanism are often used in achieve finer tuning control, that is, to spread the variations of the capacity over a large angle, often several turns. So we may use a gear to control the movement of the rotor of these ergang capacitors. The other type of variable capacitor is PVC gang capacitor. The variable PVC capacitor used PVC as a dielectric material. Since PVC is used as a dielectric material, it is called PVC gang capacitor. There are alternate layers of a fixed and variable plates. The variable plates are rotated by rotor. The variable, like that of ergang capacitor, the rotary part will rotate and it will manage the separation as well as the overlap area. The whole structure is covered by a plastic plate. The rotor is made of two sections on a common spindle. A screw shaft is attached to the plunger. When the shaft is turned, the plunger moves in or out of the slab, and the value of the capacitance changes. They are used in radio receivers, especially these PVC gang capacitors are applicable in radio receivers. So as it is variable, we can vary the area by moving the movable part to increase or decrease the overlap area. The other type of a variable capacitor is trimmer capacitors. What does it mean, trimmer capacitor? Trimmer capacitors are variable capacitors which serve the purpose of initial calibration of equipment during manufacturing or servicing. It may be during manufacturing or during servicing. These trimmer capacitors are used as a calibration. They are not intended for end-user interaction. Or the users. Trainer capacitors are almost always mounted directly on the printed circuit board for calibration purpose. So the user doesn't have access to them, and set during manufacturing using a small screwdriver. By using a small screwdriver, the professional will use these trimmer capacitors for calibration of some instruments. Trimmer capacitors are used initially set oscillator frequencies. Oscillator frequency values, latencies, rise and fall time, and other variables in the circuit. Trimmer capacitors can be rated for voltage up to 300 volts. The rating of these types of variable capacitors is around 300 volts. Also, voltage rating up to 100 volts are much more common. It's around 100. It is much more common. Since trimmer capacitors are variable capacitors, they come in a capacitance range rather than a single capacitance value. It will come within certain range. By using a screwdriver, you may attain a largest value or a smallest value within that range. The minimum capacitance is usually between 0.5 picofarad and 10 picofarad, while the maximum capacitance is usually between 1 picofarad and 120 picofarad. In between these trimmer capacitors are available. The actual capacitance value can be varied between the minimum and the maximum capacitance values for a given trimmer capacitor, but it can never be set to 0. These trimmer capacitors can't be set to 0. It is worth noting that trimmer capacitors are not polarized. They are not polarized. The construction of a trimmer capacitor is similar to the construction of their larger variable capacitors. They are similar. The construction is similar. Trimmer capacitors can be made of a semicircular metal plates. It may be made of a semicircular metal plates. One is fixed while the other can be rotated using a screwdriver. By using a screwdriver, we can rotate to vary the capacitance, that means the area. The user or the professional changes the capacitance by rotating the shaft and increasing or reducing the amount of overlap between the two plates by either moving the rotary part. It can increase or decrease the separation. The gear mechanism may be used to improve the precision by allowing multiple turns between the lowest and the highest setting. As we have already mentioned, these types of capacitors is available within certain range. So to achieve a smaller value and the larger value, we will adjust the overlap area by using a screwdriver. We will adjust the area of the overlap. This is all about today's class. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any doubt or question, don't forget to put your suggestion on the comment box. Thank you.